Hello everybody, it's Wyron here with another game of Total War Warhammer Quick Match. This time around I'm playing as Chaos against the Internet Banker, who is playing Brettonia on the map Galbaraz. Um, Definitely it should be an interesting match. So, I just started. I'm going to pause it for a second because this game does start fairly quickly because I immediately saw his artillery. So I'm not entirely sure what a proper comp for Chaos is. I don't really play Chaos very often, but after doing that fun little dwarf rush build, I decided to do a night of trying to do Chaos. It has been. I did several different matches. Again, most of my early ones were against Wood Elves. And there's not really much to say for Chaos versus Wood Elves. You basically bring a lot of Forsaken. So I wanted to show you guys some good gameplay. Make sure you guys something that was a little more interesting than just churning out a bunch of Forsaken and charging the enemy. So I did this. I ran this game. Now I don't entirely know, of course, what the Chaos meta is. I don't follow it too closely. I don't really play Chaos very often outside of campaign at all. My main faction is largely Brettonia, but basically, I ran this build. I centered around Sigvald against Brettonia because I know Brettonia can bring a pretty large air contingent. So instead of trying to contest the air, which is an option, I decided to go cheap and go keep everyone on foot. So that if they want to fight me, they have to land and fight me down the ground. So I bring Prince Sigvald with Auric armor and all his abilities. I did bring two Chaos Sorcerer of Death. Both have Fate of Buna, Spirit Leech, Scroll of Shielding, and Arcane Conduit, plus the extra. Winds of Magic and Winds of Magic regeneration trait. Then to back myself up, I have two units of Aspiring Champions. I wasn't entirely sure what Brettonia was going to bring. I did want some units with shields because I do know Brettonia can bring a fairly decent range contingent, so I did bring some Aspiring Champions. Also, just to stiffen up my line, provide them with more morale boosts to tank out enemy cavalry, possibly that sort of stuff. Just to be a general purpose unit. Then backing them up 4 units of Forsaken, they will perform, from what I've seen, fairly well against most Brettonian infantry. They won't do well, obviously, against foot squires. Though even there, they'll do okay, because foot squires are somewhat cheap anti-armor infantry. So Forsaken will do okay even against them. Which is a very strong pick against most Brettonian units, except for the Brettonian cavalry, which can obviously do a major number on the Forsaken. Since they don't really have armor piercing and aren't faster and don't have any charge defense. Behind that, I did run 2 units of Chaos Warriors with great weapons and a single unit of Chaos Marauders with great weapons. They're there to give me some armor piercing against enemy cavalry and also just to dish out more damage against the infantry in case I was dealing with a big infantry blob. Behind that, I ran a unit of Dragon Ogres with a unit of Chaos Warhounds with poison. This is to shut down, because I didn't expect too much cavalry from my opponent, so this was basically to shut down individual units of cavalry or shut down the enemy lord. If he decides to land or if he's in the air, that sort of stuff. Now my opponent did run a somewhat, I think maybe a bit unconventional build for Brettonia. Did run a mounted lord. I was surprised. I actually expected Lewin. And he not only did he run a lord, he ran a lord without a potion of healing, or potion of toughness, which I do think is available for the Brettonian lord. Normally I've seen people run the Enchantress or Lewin though, and that was not the case here. Now, actually when I saw this, I was a fair bit worried because I saw the, I'm going to start running the game. Because it does take a while. I'm kind of moving towards my opponent, and he's going to start shelling me with trebuchets. My opponent did run a fairly weak front line of men-at-arms with shields, and some spearmen-at-arms with shields, which is an interesting pick. I think Chaos doesn't really bring ranged units. I could have brought some skirmish cav, obviously, but I don't think that's a great choice against Brettonia, because Brettonia does tend to bring archers. And against those, they don't do too well. Now, the Aspiring Champions are actually doing fairly well against the trebuchets. The trebuchet can't really one-shot them, at least not reliably, I don't think. But they are opening fire. The 2 units of trebuchets I think are an iffy pick, as are the peasant bowmen with fire arrows. Chaos doesn't have too many units with regeneration or anything where the fire would be beneficial. Trolls were not really a likely pick in my opinion. Similarly, the trebuchets are a bit iffy. And spearmen and the shields, once again, a bit of an iffy choice. That said, though, questing knights I think are a very strong choice against the Chaos. And when I saw this build, I was definitely a little worried because the blob of questing knights with their very solid armor piercing and melee stats. I was definitely kind of worried that they would get in on my Forsaken and just kind of melt them down. My Forsaken wouldn't really be able to dish out the damage in return. So I do here, as I see my opponent kind of moving out to my wings with his, or to my flanks with his questing knights, what I do is I try to mirror him. Over here I move my Dragon Ogres to mirror this motion over here, and I know that I can't match. I was immediately worried because I didn't have that much mobility, not as much mobility as my opponent. So, oh yeah, and my opponent brought a Paladin. This was an interesting pick in place of, say, a Grail Relic. Probably he was hoping to stiffen up his front line with that Encourage. I think it would have been better served with a Grail Relic and maybe like a really cheap Enchantress with Lord of Life, like in one spell, but he didn't. Now, so on this right flank over here, I'm trying to match my opponent's cavalry with Aspiring Champions, the Chaos Marauders with great weapons, and Chaos Warriors with great weapons, just to block him off over here. In the meantime, on the left flank, I'm trying to mirror my opponent with Dragon Ogres, Chaos Warhounds with Poison, and a Sorcerer of Death, who I'm ordering to cast Fate of Buna on this back unit over here of Questing Knights. In the meantime, Sigvald, this Sorcerer of Death, Aspiring Champions, and these Chaos Warriors with great weapons are all pushing forward, trying to get into my opponent's infantry. Forsaken will do incredibly well against most Brettonia infantry, except Squires, so I immediately plow them in, and they start destroying the Brettonia infantry. As you can see, this was after one charge. There was no fire they got beforehand. These men-at-arms are already almost dead. So are these guys. And now this is where you can see why the Grail Relic is so crucial for Brettonia infantry, but also why it's usually better to bring, say, something like Pilgrims or Squires, because this infantry line is completely buckling. The only unit that's staying intact is the Paladin, but Paladin is about to be hit by Sigvald. He can't really flee from Sigvald, and Sigvald is obviously duelist, one of the best one-to-one heroes in the game, as long as he's not being knocked over. Just gonna shred the Paladin. My opponent does charge his Questing Knights here into my back. In the meantime, these guys get hit by Fate of Buna, which is actually melting them, and my opponent does not have a Lord of Life, so he won't be able to heal these guys. Over here, I hit these Questing Knights with Warhounds with Poison, which should slow them down enough for my Dragon Ogres to get on top of them, and then definitely should make them weaker, and make it so that they can't escape. So these guys are stuck. I'm now chasing them with Chaos Warriors and Great Weapons. That might have been a bit of a mistake. Over here, the Forsaken are getting pincered by the Questing Knights. Same over here. As you can see, these Forsaken, just like they melted that and Brettonian front line incredibly quickly, the Questing Knights melted the Forsaken incredibly quickly. That's just kind of a hard counter there. The Questing Knights are incredibly potent. Now, my opponent is still bringing up Spearmen with Arms and Shields, try to stop me over here. His Bowmen aren't really getting too much damage, and his Trebuchets don't really have much to shoot at, but they will shortly start shooting over here on this flank. Paladin's breaking because he can't really take on all these Forsaken, even though Forsaken aren't the best of anti-hero units by any means. I hit this Lord with Spirit Leech, have Sigvald on him. My opponent should have Cycle Charged him, got him out of there, but he doesn't. Forsaken over here gets Scroll Shielding dropped on him just so they can keep fighting these Spearmen at Arms. As you can see, when they lose, when the Forsaken lose their Frenzy, they become a much weaker unit. So they go in, they get that burst of damage off, and then you saw how fast they deleted the men-at-arms with swords, but once that Frenzy's worn off, they're kind of a lot less useful. Over here, though, Chaos Marauders have gotten on top of his bows and his Spearmen at Arms. They're just kind of destroying them. These Forsaken still have their Frenzy up. This other unit, Forsaken, does get countercharged by the Questing Knights, but they in turn get hit by Fate of Buna. Fate of Buna is incredibly potent, especially when there's no Lore of Life to back these guys up. And now these poor field Trebuchets are absolutely getting destroyed. They haven't really done too much. Spearmen at Arms are getting destroyed by Chaos Warriors with great weapons. These Questing Knights aren't really doing too well against the Aspiring Champions. The Chaos Marauders are getting trashed, but they are dishing out some damage in return, because they do have great weapons with armor piercing. These men-at-arms are holding out surprisingly well. Unfortunately, I forget about my Dragon Ogres, and they're just standing here looking pretty. Same with my opponent's Questing Knights, who are all the way over here. I finally realized these guys are there, and try to move them around. Sigvald over here, these Questing Knights are finally breaking, but I sent my Warhounds on them, so they shouldn't be able to escape. Actually, no, I sent my Warhounds against the enemy. So my enemy shifted his Lord over here, hoping probably to break this flank and hope maybe recover and stabilize. But I sent my Warhounds over there because I plan to poison their Lord, make sure he can't escape, and then get in on him with the Dragon Ogres. Now, unfortunately, the Dragon Ogres have some pathfinding issues. They run into the men-at-arms and they get tied down over there, so they never actually reach their Lord, I don't think. But I do get a Spirit Leech off on their Lord, which starts melting him down. He's not really going to be able to survive. In the meantime, these Trebuchets are completely screwed. They're about to be hit by Sigvald and this Sorcerer of Death. And my opponent's army just completely shatters at this stage. Their Lord just can't deal with all this infantry surrounding him. Completely melts down. And that's basically game, I do believe. Yep, there we go. Pyrrhic victory. And now this was a rather one-sided match, and somewhat surprising, but I do think there's some lessons here. As I said, I did some gameplay prior to this where I ran against Wood Elves, and I don't think there was that much to learn from that. Basically, I just ran, actually, you know what? Maybe I'll run. This was a very short replay, so I might do one of the Elven replays as well, just to demonstrate some things there. But definitely, as you can see, my opponent's Questing Knights did amazing work. Questing Knights are very, very powerful against most Chaos units. Chaos doesn't really have too many anti-large counters. They do have Fate of Buna, but if you bring a Lore of Life, these guys can definitely tank for a while. Units with shields, I think, are not worth it. It's better to bring in units with either against Chaos, you want to use with armor piercing. So Squires are definitely a good choice, especially for the cost, just to tie your opponent down. Similarly, I wouldn't have done Peasant Bowman with Fire Arrows. If you wanted an ability on him, I would have done Poison. Forsaken, as you can see, absolutely destroy. Even the ones who got caught by the Questing Knights, they dished out a ridiculous amount of damage. 99 kills, they just swarmed all over infantry. This definitely, I think, shows some important things. Obviously, guys with great weapons did okay. They mostly got tied down fighting Questing Knights. Aspiring Champions stiffened up my front line. Fate of Buna definitely was a huge boon. Similarly, Sigvald shut down their Lord, shut down their Paladin, did a great job that way. Dragon Ogres didn't do too much, neither the Chaos Warhounds, but they did help shut down those Questing Knights, which are a fairly pricey unit. But I do, and for my opponent, he did got very little use out of most of these units. These field trebuchets, yeah, they got 40 and 32 kills, but given how much they cost and the fact that it wasn't like critical game-deciding moves there, I don't think it was really worth it. The questing knights, once again, is really his only useful unit on the field, or his only impactful unit on the field. But I do think this brings up some interesting points about dealing with chaos. If you're running with Brettonia, definitely I wouldn't bring men-at-arms with shields, spearmen-at-arms with shields. Your opponent is not likely to bring too much ranged. Even if they do, then you can shoo them away with a handful of peasant bowmen. Another thing, peasant bowmen with fire arrows, not really worth it. There's very few chaos units with regeneration. Trolls, and those are only, and almost nobody runs trolls, so not really worth it in my opinion. It could be more useful to run them with pox arrows if you want to run any ability just to debuff the enemy units. I think this definitely shows why Grail Relic is so crucial. A Grail Relic with its immunity to psychology, I do think definitely some of my units in here cause fear. Actually, maybe they don't. I'm not entirely sure if Forsaken cause fear, but definitely the fact that these guys weren't stiff enough, their leadership was very low, meant that they routed, they just got melted down and fled immediately. And if these had been, say, dismounted squires, they might have been capable of holding their own at least for a little bit, dishing out some damage to those Forsaken, letting those questing knights get in position and recharge. The other thing I think is that it's important to bring Lore of Life. Chaos does tend to bring Sorcerers of Death. Even if I just brought one, Fate of Buna can be absolutely crippling to big units like the questing knight, or to heavy cavalry units like the questing knights. So definitely important to bring Lore of Life. I do think maybe not mandatory, but it's definitely like a good idea, especially if you can do it fairly cheaply. If you can just bring a dismounted damsel with one spell, you can just bring, say, Earthblood, and that's good enough. Fate of Buna doesn't really kill units. It usually just drops their HP on the whole squad by a bunch, so that you can easily counteract that with Earthblood. The Lord, I think, is a bit of an interesting pick. I think Lewin or the Fanchantress are generally a better pick. I was a little worried about the Fanchantress. That was actually another reason why I brought the Chaos Warhounds, that if my opponent brought Fanchantress, because if they bring Fanchantress, Chaos has very few options to run down the Fanchantress, so I was planning to use the Warhounds to slow her down enough for the Dragon Ogres to catch her. Or hopefully pen her in and finish her off, because I was expecting the Fanchantress, actually. So I definitely think those are some important little tidbits for dealing with Chaos. I definitely think this is a fairly solid build against Brettonia. Maybe some better anti-large options would have been ideal, but with Fate of Buna on these guys, I think it was definitely doable. Forsaken, very good pick against weak factions with weak armor. Because of that frenzy and ridiculous damage. And I think we're going to do it, and I'm going to do a second game here. I'll run through a second game real quick against Wood Elves. This was a very quick match. I actually ended up with 2 games against this guy on the same night, and the first game was a little bit different. I did end up winning that one, but I ran a somewhat different list, and I think a less competent one against Wood Elves. So I ran the Sorcerers I had mounted. So as you can see, this is a fairly similar list to the one I ran against Brettonia, but instead of running great weapons, I'm running normal Chaos Warriors, and obviously not running any Aspiring Champions. So I'm just going to play the game. My opponent's comp, actually I'll slow it down a smidge for a second just to run over my opponent's build. He ran Deepwood Scouts, Swift Shivers, a bunch of Glade Guard, Way Watchers, Glade Guard with Starfire Shafts, 2 units of War Dancers with Swords, some Eternal Guard, generic, a Glade Lord, or Glady on foot, and then Wildwood Rangers back here just to give some extra AP damage. Wild Riders just screening these 2 Deepwood Scouts with Swift Shivers. My comp fairly similar. Once again, I'm bringing Dragon Ogres mostly to shut down enemy large units that I'm worried about. Like I was a little worried about Treekin just stopping my Forsaken, because Forsaken don't do well against armor at all. They'll do amazing against squishy units, but not against Treekin. I hid my Chaos units, Warhounds with Poison, planning to use them to slow down either enemy Wild Riders or enemy Deepwood Scouts. So I'm pushing these Chaos Warriors forward, and just using them to zone, kind of. Throw a fast forward a little quick, real quick. And now my opponent starts peppering me from the flanks. Obviously, I'm not going to go chasing after these guys. I know for a fact, because I see most of his army up here, I know for a fact that these guys are basically alone. Now, these Wild Riders charge in, so I counter-turn with Forsaken. Unfortunately, I'm a bit slow on the draw, so my Warhounds, instead of just getting in there immediately and pinstering these guys, slowing and preventing their escape, they're too late, so these guys do back off, at least for a little bit. In the meantime, I'm just pushing straight forward. I'm not going to bother dispatching some Forsaken to chase these guys. I want to get straight into my enemy's front line, crack it open, bust it, and go straight for his back line. I'm not doing any subtle, sneaky strategy here. Unfortunately, my opponent, he doesn't really have focused fire. His units are kind of spewing shots all over the place. And so, instead of, say, focusing out a unit or 2 of Forsaken, and that significantly inhibiting my early game, or my early fight potential, he is kind of getting scattered all over the place. These Forsaken are getting a little focused. They've been getting peppered for a while, and obviously these guys getting stuck with the Wild Riders. But other than that, my opponent isn't getting much focus fire done. Now over here, the Wild Riders break, and I use my healthy unit Forsaken to tie down his Eternal Guard, while the Wolves or the Warhounds and the weak Forsaken chase out the Swift Shivers. Over here, these Forsaken are immediately losing. I cast Fate of Buna on Wildwood Rangers. In this game, I actually only brought Fate of Buna on one of the Chaos Sorcerers, not both of them, because I didn't have the points. The rest of the loadout was the same. I actually forgot Auric Armor on Sigvald as well, which was a bit shameful. It wasn't a pre-prepared build or anything, and I thought I put it on, and I only realized it in-game. Now, Wildwood Rangers are getting melted down by Fate of Buna. Unfortunately, I get a Prey of Anathrema dropped to my Dragon Ogres. As you can see, once again, that's Frenzy and damage early on against these poor War Dancers just completely destroyed them with the Forsaken. Now, for some Forsaken are breaking, they're falling back. The Dragon Ogres are getting absolutely destroyed with Prayer of Anathrema. But now my heroes have pushed through. My opponent's center is completely buckled, despite having the majority of his strong units there. And actually, these poor Wild Rangers have almost been wiped to man. In the meantime, on the left flank, my opponent's kind of getting wiped. I am still tying these Eternal Guard with Forsaken. That is actually cost efficient for my opponent. But over here, Warhounds are getting dropped on these Gladiator with Starfire. I'm using the unit Forsaken onward to deal with these Gladiator with Starfire shafts. My opponent's Glade Lord is getting tag teamed over here by Sigvald and the two Chaos Sorcerer of Death with Spirit Leech. And I'm pushing the Dragon Ogres through. Dropped the Scroll of Shielding on him a little while ago, and I'm trying to get him on the Archers to deal with him. Unfortunately, I do believe the Forsaken got distracted and went back after the Starfire shafts over here instead of the second unit, which was a little unfortunate. That was a bit of a waste of there. And so what I do here is, obviously there's this unit. I'll shortly throw him against these Swift Shivers. But so what I do here is I use the Chaos Warriors to try to tie down my opponent's Eternal Guard, and that frees up some of my Forsaken and my heroes and my Dragon Ogres to push through and go after my opponent's backline. Because these Eternal Guard, obviously it's not cost efficient to use Chaos Warriors against them, but it does tying them. But this way, I'm not wasting too many units dealing with them. They're not going to dish too much damage out anyway. And instead, I'm dealing with my opponent's real damage dealers, which are all of these units. Now, the War Dancers do tag team these Dragon Ogres with the Way Watchers and the Glade Guard and completely destroy them. These guys rout, and I think they might just flee off the battlefield entirely. Forsaken, though, and the Warhounds are dishing out ridiculous amounts of damage. This unit Forsaken is on top of my opponent's Glade Guard. They will get shut down by the War Dancers, but it's just a decent amount of damage going out. Prince Sigvald and the Sorcerer of Death are killing this Lord. This Sorcerer of Death is just standing there looking pretty. I think he dropped the Scroll of Shielding on these guys, but I didn't manage to push him in time. In the meantime, over here, my opponent's line is slowly falling apart. Unfortunately, not all of these Forsaken managed to get clear. They are still tied down. These Chaos Warriors are still tied down. These Forsaken kindly cleared out these guys, and shortly they'll be these Eternal Guard, and they'll be able to deal with these Wild Riders fairly effectively. Wild Riders are pretty strong on the charge, but Forsaken, yeah, and as you can see, my opponent's army just shatters at this point. As I said, it was a quick game. Most games against Elves, unless they decide to cut you, are fairly quick because Elves are pretty glass cannony. They either kill you very quick or they loose you very quickly. Once again, I just think this should show like the usage of like part of this. I'm just learning Chaos. I haven't really played Chaos too much, not even campaign and even less in multiplayer. This I do believe actually might be the first set of games I've done against multiplayer. Forsaken, I think, they're really potent against factions with low armor. So Wood Elves, Empire, Brettonia, any faction that in general doesn't have a lot of high armor units, Forsaken will do well against because they can flank around your opponent. They're fast. They have frenzy. They have ridiculous weapon damage. So they will, or weapon strength. So they will just melt down units that have low armor. As you saw, those War Dancers got completely deleted almost as quickly as those poor men at arms with shields in the previous game. Chaos Warriors did okay. Obviously, the Chaos Sorcerer of Death aren't really here to secure kills. Neither is even Sigvald. They're just here to kind of bully enemy lords, be tanky and not lose my leadership, and provide magic support with Fate of Buna and Spirit Leech. Dragon Ogres didn't do too well. They got shut down by the ranged fire. That wasn't too surprising. I would mostly just bring them to counter enemy large, especially Treekin or Tree Men. The Warhounds had repaid for themselves by a lot in this game. They can potentially do really well against Glade Guard and Elven ranged, if they can get on top of them. Forsaken, though, really powerful. I think that's the main point I'm trying to make here, and just kind of demonstrate just how powerful they can be. My opponent did run a somewhat ranged heavy build, and actually the previous game we did, he didn't go. He ran a somewhat different build. He ran more Way Watchers, Wild Riders, didn't run the War Dancers. I think that he decided that he needs to match me better on the front line and get more shooting units, but it didn't quite work out. He dropped his Glade Lord off a dragon as well. She was previously on Glade Lords. So it was definitely we both adjusted the build somewhat. I basically just this build I didn't adjust it necessarily to what my opponent had run the game prior. I basically just adjusted it to what I thought I'd seen didn't work well against elves, because my opponent ran a pretty generic elf build, I think, and so definitely these Forsaken, very powerful unit against squishy factions. I do hope you guys enjoyed these videos. I thank my opponents for giving me such fun games. I definitely appreciate it. I had lots of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos. I hope you guys found them entertaining and maybe got some ideas on what builds to run with Chaos. If you did, feel free to leave a like or subscribe down below. And if you have any comments, criticisms, advice that you'd like to post down in the comments section, feel free to post them. I will be sure to read and respond to them as soon as I can. Once again, I appreciate you all for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, and Wyvern out.